Picture this. I'm standing at the edge of my kitchen window at dawn, watching the world wake up through a thin layer of frost on the glass, my breath fogging up the pane as I trace idle patterns with my fingertip. There's a peculiar stillness in these early moments, a quiet that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break. My name is Jade, and at 36, I've carved out what most would call a steady life. Married, settled in a suburban home with neat hedges and a mailbox that always has the flag down, I'm the kind of woman you'd pass by without a second glance. But beneath the surface, there's a hum, a faint vibration of something I can't quite name. My husband, Matthew, is the anchor of this life. He's kind in the way that feels effortless, dependable, like the sunrise, always there even if you don't stop to notice. As a software engineer, he's often tethered to his laptop, working late into the night, his fingers tapping out code while I linger in the living room with a book I'm not really reading. Our marriage is a well-worn routine. Dinners when our schedules sync, usually something quick like pasta or takeout, weekend errands to the hardware store or grocery, and the occasional movie night where we fall asleep halfway through. It's stable, comfortable, like a favorite sweater you've worn too many times. But sometimes, in the quiet spaces between our conversations, I feel a draft of distance, an unspoken gap neither of us knows how to bridge. I don't dwell on it, though. Not yet. Most of my days are spent in the city, far from the sleepy rhythm of our neighborhood. I work as an executive assistant at a towering corporate firm, the kind of place where the air smells of ambition and expensive cologne. My desk is a small island in a sea of glass and steel, surrounded by the hum of fluorescent lights and the relentless buzz of deadlines. I'm good at my job. Organizing schedules with military precision, preparing reports that are always on time, managing correspondence like it's a game of chess. It's demanding, often draining, but it keeps my mind occupied. And then there's my boss, Mr. Lawson. He's in his late 40s, always dressed in suits so impeccably tailored they seem to be an extension of him, not just fabric. His eyes are what strike me most, piercing, almost unnerving, like they can peel back the layers of whoever he's looking at. I've never seen him flustered. His demeanor is calm, controlled, every movement deliberate, every word measured. He commands a room without ever raising his voice, and there's something about being in his orbit that feels different. I can't put my finger on it, not yet. It's not just authority or power, it's something else. Something that lingers in the air after he's left the room. The office itself is a world of sharp edges and cold efficiency, floor to sea. Every morning starts the same way for me. I shuffle into the office building, the weight of my bag pulling at my shoulder, and head straight for the break room. The coffee machine hums as I pour myself a cup, the bitter aroma waking me up before the caffeine even hits. I cradle the mug in my hands, letting the warmth seep into my palms, before making my way to my desk just outside Mr. Lawson's glass-walled office. From here, I can see him through the transparent barrier, already seated, his posture perfect, his focus unbreakable as he reviews documents or takes calls. I settle into my chair, the familiar creak of it grounding me, and dive into the stack of emails waiting in my inbox. It's a routine I could do in my sleep. Reply, forward, flag for follow-up, repeat. But even as my fingers fly over the keyboard, I'm hyper-aware of his presence just a few feet away, like a low current running beneath the surface of my day. There are these small moments with Mr. Lawson that I've started to notice more than I should. I'll walk into his office with a file, and he'll look up from his work, giving me a curt nod as he takes it from me. It's nothing, really, just a gesture, but I feel the weight of it. Sometimes, when I hand him a document, his fingers brush against mine for the briefest of seconds, and my breath catches, unbidden. It's accidental, I'm sure of it, but my mind lingers on the contact far longer than it should. Then there are the times when his gaze holds mine just a beat too long before he turns away, his expression unreadable, leaving me to wonder if I imagined the intensity in his eyes. He's never inappropriate, never says anything out of line. His professionalism is a fortress, stoic, impenetrable. He doesn't flirt, doesn't joke, doesn't even smile much. And yet, there's this unspoken thing, this quiet tension that seems to hum in the air between us. It's in the way he carries himself, the measured precision of his movements, the deep timbre of his voice when he gives me an instruction. I can't ignore it, no matter how hard I try. I tell myself it's nothing, that I'm reading into things that aren't there. But when I'm back at home, the contrast is stark. After a long day, I sit on the couch next to Matthew, the TV flickering with some show neither of us is really watching. He's scrolling through his phone, the blue light casting shadows on his face, while I stare at the screen, my mind a million miles away. The silence between us isn't uncomfortable, but it's heavy, filled with all the things we don't say. I can't help but feel this void, this empty space inside me that I don't know how to fill. It's not that I don't love Matthew. I do, in my own way. But there's a restlessness in me. Today started like a storm waiting to break, the kind of day at the office where every second feels like it's ticking down to some invisible explosion. Deadlines were piling up like bricks on my chest, each email a new weight, each task a sharper edge. We had a major presentation looming for a high-stakes client, the kind of deal that could make or break careers, and the pressure was a living thing, buzzing in the air. My desk was a battlefield of sticky notes and spreadsheets, my fingers racing across the keyboard to keep up with the demands. Colleagues darted past, their voices clipped and urgent, the whole floor vibrating with a frantic energy that made my head spin. I barely had time to breathe, let alone think, as I juggled last-minute revisions and double-checked figures for the pitch. As the day bled into evening, Mr. Lawson called me into his office. His voice through the intercom was steady, as always. But there was something else there, a quieter undercurrent I couldn't quite place. He asked me to stay late to finalize some documents and crunch the last of the numbers. It wasn't an unusual request. Late nights were part of the job, especially with a project this big. But the way he spoke felt different, softer somehow, more personal. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me through the glass, and murmured a quick, "of course," before getting back to work. The office began to empty out, one by one, my colleagues trickling away like sand through an hourglass. Soon, it was just the two of us, the vast space shrinking down to the dimly lit corner where his office sat. The silence was heavy, amplifying every little sound, my heels clicking against the polished floor as I moved between my desk and his office. The rustle of papers as I sorted through reports, the faint hum of the air conditioning that seemed louder now without the chatter of voices to drown it out. At one point, I decided to make a small gesture, something to break the tension of the long hours. I brewed a cup of tea in the break room, the steam curling up from the mug as I carried it carefully to his office. I set it down on his desk, expecting a quick nod of thanks, but he didn't take the cup right away. Instead, his fingers brushed against mine as he reached for it. A touch so deliberate it sent a jolt through me, electric and sharp. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, and when I looked up, his eyes were locked on mine. "You're the most precise thing in my chaos," he said, his voice low and steady, each word landing like a stone in still water. My heart raced, pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it in the quiet. His gaze held me there, pinned in place, and I felt the ground shift beneath me, a dangerous tilt I couldn't ignore. I knew I should pull away. I knew I should step back, mumble something about the reports, and retreat to the safety of my desk. I'm married to Matthew, a man who's never given me a reason to doubt his love, a man who's probably at home right now, waiting for me to text that I'll be late. But in that moment, with Mr. Lawson's eyes on me, that unspoken tension I'd felt for weeks, months maybe, surged to the surface, raw and undeniable. My mind screamed at me to stop, to think, but my body didn't listen. There was a pull, a current I couldn't fight, dragging me towards something I knew was wrong, but couldn't resist. And then it happened. Right there in the office, on the large oak desk, where reports and contracts usually lay in neat stacks, I found myself instead. I surrendered to the moment, to the haze of desire and recklessness that clouded every rational thought. Mr. Lawson's movements were calm, silent, confident, as if he'd known this would happen all along. There was no rush, no hesitation, just a deliberate certainty that unraveled me. I didn't resist, couldn't, even if I'd wanted to. It was like watching myself from outside my body, caught in a surreal clarity as I crossed The silence that followed was suffocating, a heavy blanket draped over the room, muffling even the faint hum of the air conditioning. I stood there, my breath uneven, my hands trembling just slightly as I tried to anchor myself back to reality. Mr. Lawson, though, was a picture of composure. He straightened his suit with that same meticulous precision I'd always noticed, smoothing out invisible creases as if the last few minutes hadn't just shattered every boundary I'd ever set for myself. His face was unreadable, his eyes cool and distant now, like he'd flipped a switch and returned to the man I saw every day behind that glass wall. I couldn't look at him. My gaze dropped to the floor as I fumbled with the hem of my blouse, smoothing it down over and over, a pointless gesture to steady my racing pulse. My skin still burned where he'd touched me, a lingering heat that made the quiet even louder. The weight of what I'd done settled into my chest, not as guilt, at least not yet, but as something else, something sharper. It was a strange, unsettling clarity, like I'd stepped outside of my own life and seen it for what it really was. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and yet, in that moment, I didn't feel the crushing remorse I expected. Instead, there was this hollow space inside me, echoing with questions I wasn't ready to answer. What did this mean? Who was I now? My mind churned, but my body felt oddly still, as if it had already accepted what my heart hadn't caught up to. Mr. Lawson didn't say much. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes, a quiet authority that filled the room as much as his presence always did. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small folded piece of paper, and placed it on the desk between us. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, and I watched, frozen, as his fingers lingered on the note for just a second before he withdrew. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out of the office. His footsteps echoed down the empty hallway, each one a sharp, fading drumbeat that seemed to mark the end of something. Or maybe the beginning. I stood there, staring at the door long after he was gone, the sound of his departure still ringing in my ears. Finally, I reached for the note, my fingers hesitant as I unfolded it. His handwriting was neat, precise, just like everything else about him. The words stared back at me, stark and unapologetic. Now we both know boundaries are just words. The body is the truth. A chill raced down my spine, prickling my skin as if the temperature in the room had dropped 10 degrees. I read the line again, then a third time, each repetition sinking deeper, cutting through the fog in my mind. It wasn't just a statement, it was a challenge, a mirror held up to everything I'd ever told myself about restraint, about morality, about who I was supposed to be. My hands shook as I folded the note back up, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Instead, I slipped it into my pocket, a secret weight I'd carry with me. I don't know how long I sat there at the desk after that. Time seemed to blur. the minutes stretching into an eternity as I stared at the scattered papers in front of me. The teacup I'd brought him earlier sat untouched, the steam long gone, the liquid cold and forgotten. My mind kept replaying the night, not just the act itself, but every moment leading up to it. The way his voice had softened when he asked me to stay late, the deliberate brush of his fingers, the intensity in his eyes that I hadn't imagined after all. Each memory was a thread, weaving together into a tapestry I couldn't look away from, no matter how much I wanted to. I tried to focus on the work still waiting for me, the numbers and reports that had seemed so urgent just hours ago, but my hands wouldn't move. I was stuck, trapped in the aftermath of my own choices. It was well past midnight when I finally left the office. The building was a ghost. I don't remember much about the drive home. The streets were empty, the city lights blurring into streaks of color through the windshield as my mind churned, replaying everything over and over. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the leather creaking under my fingers, as if holding on could somehow anchor me to a version of myself I recognized. But it didn't. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the weight in my chest had grown heavier, sharper, a blade I couldn't pull out even if I wanted to. I sat there for a moment, engine off, the silence of the car pressing in around me. Our house loomed ahead, dark except for the faint glow of a porch light Matthew always left on for me. It looked so ordinary, so unchanged, and yet I felt like a stranger stepping into someone else's life. I pushed the car door open, the cold night air biting at my skin as I made my way to the front door. My key turned in the lock with a familiar click, but it sounded louder tonight, like a warning I couldn't heed. Stepping inside, the house was still, wrapped in that late-night hush that feels almost sacred. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I moved through the entryway, a sound I've heard 1,000 times, but never noticed until now. It was like the house itself was acknowledging my presence, reminding me of where I belonged, or where I was supposed to belong. A soft glow spilled from the hallway, the nightlight we keep on for those middle-of-the-night trips to the kitchen, casting long, gentle shadows on the walls. I paused there, just for a second, letting the familiarity wash over me, but it didn't soothe the storm inside. I made my way to the bedroom, my steps slow, deliberate, as if I could delay the inevitable. The door was ajar, and I nudged it open just enough to slip inside. The room was dark, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains, and there he was, Matthew, asleep, his form a quiet outline under the blankets. I stood in the doorway, frozen, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was so even, so peaceful, a sound that used to lull me to sleep on nights when my mind wouldn't quiet. I watched him for a long time, longer than I can measure, taking in the way his face looked so unguarded, so trusting, even in slumber. His brow was smooth, free of the lines that sometimes crease it when he's deep in thought over his work. One hand rested loosely on the pillow beside him where I usually lay, as if waiting for me to come back. I waited for it then, the guilt. I stood there, rooted to the spot, expecting a wave of regret to crash over me, to drown me in shame for what I'd done. I wanted it to come, needed it to, because that would mean I was still the person I thought I was, someone who cared enough to feel remorse. But it didn't come. Instead, there was this cold, piercing clarity, like a fog lifting to reveal a landscape I'd never seen before. My heart didn't ache looking at Matthew. It didn't race with fear of being found out. What I felt was something else entirely. A quiet, terrifying acknowledgement of the truth. I liked what happened with Mr. Lawson. I don't regret it. Not even now, standing here in the shadow of my marriage, in the space where I've built a life with a man who doesn't deserve this betrayal. That realization doesn't scare me because of what I've done to Matthew. It scares me because of how little I care about the fallout. It's like I've peeled back a layer of myself and found something raw and unfamiliar underneath, something that doesn't flinch at the wreckage it might cause. I moved then, almost mechanically, slipping off my shoes one by one, the soft thud of them hitting the floor barely audible over the sound of Matthew's breathing. I placed them neatly by the door, a habit born of years of routine, even as my mind spun in directions I couldn't control. Crossing the room, I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping slightly under my weight, careful not to disturb the stillness that enveloped Matthew. I didn't lie down, though. I couldn't. Not yet. I just sat there, staring at the wall, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of that folded note still tucked in my pocket. It was like a pulse, a quiet reminder of the choice I'd made, a choice that had already started to reshape everything I thought I knew about myself. The days that followed were a strange blur, a mix of mundane routine and an undercurrent of something darker, something I couldn't shake. Returning to work that first morning after the incident, I felt a knot of dread twist in my stomach as I stepped off the elevator onto our floor. The familiar hum of the office greeted me. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the low murmur of conversations. But it all felt distant, like I was hearing it through a thick pane of glass. I approached my desk with a forced calm, my eyes darting toward Mr. Lawson's office before I could stop myself. He was there, as always, seated behind that imposing desk, his posture as composed as ever, his focus on the screen in front of him. My heart thudded unevenly as I settled into my chair, half expecting something. A look, a word, anything to acknowledge what had happened. But there was nothing. He didn't glance up, didn't call me in, didn't even acknowledge my presence beyond the usual curt nod when I dropped off a stack of reports later that morning. It was as if that night had never happened. As if the air between us hadn't been charged with something forbidden just hours before. And yet, those lingering glances I'd noticed before were still there, subtle but piercing, catching me off guard when I least expected it. Each time our eyes met, even for a fleeting second, I felt a jolt, a silent reminder of the secret we now shared. It unsettled me, yes, but it also drew me in deeper, like a moth to a flame I knew would burn me if I got too close. I couldn't help it. I was more drawn to him now than ever. That moment in his office had forged an invisible thread between us, a connection I couldn't sever even if I wanted to. Every interaction, no matter how small, carried a weight it hadn't before. When he asked me to schedule a meeting, his voice was the same measured tone, but I heard something else beneath it, a shadow of intimacy that made my pulse quicken. When I handed him a file, I braced myself for the accidental brush of his fingers, and when it didn't happen, I found myself almost disappointed. It was maddening, this pull I felt, this unspoken bond that tied me to him in a way I couldn't escape. I told myself to focus, to bury it, to pretend everything was normal. But normal felt like a costume I was wearing, ill-fitting and suffocating. At home, the contrast was even starker. I went through the motions with Matthew, cooking dinner with mechanical precision, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, setting the table while he sat at the counter, scrolling through his phone or chatting about his day. I nodded at the right moments, offered small smiles, murmured responses to his questions about work, but I wasn't really there. My mind was elsewhere, replaying moments I shouldn't dwell on, feeling the phantom weight of that note in my pocket, even when it wasn't there. The distance between Matthew and me grew wider with every passing day, a chasm I didn't know how to bridge, and the worst part was that he didn't seem to notice. He was oblivious to the storm raging inside me, to the way I'd started to feel like a stranger in my own life, wearing the mask of the wife he knew, while something else simmered beneath the surface. I watched him sometimes, over the rim of a wine glass or across the dinner table, wondering if he'd ever see it, if he'd ever sensed that something had shifted. But his eyes remained warm, trusting, unaware of the betrayal I carried like a second skin. Late at night, when the house was quiet and Matthew was asleep, I'd slip out of bed and retrieve that note from the drawer, reading its words over and over, until I finally found the courage to let it go, knowing that the truth would eventually find its way to light. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.